Hi guys, welcome to part 3 of this course. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're going to start unlocking things and get more practical, and I think some light bulbs are going to turn on. If you have not seen parts 1 and 2, make sure you check them out. I'm going to leave the links somewhere on this page. And also, if for some reason you're watching part 3 and you have no clue where you're at, you've got to download the Music Theory DNA worksheet. I'll also leave a link for you to download this somewhere on this page. But if you're here, most likely you followed steps 1 and 2. And today we're going to really make sense of all that. In part 1, we discussed the importance of the theory DNA diagram, something that I discovered a few years back and that I use every single day. We learned how to use it and how the columns represent different emotions that we can trigger. And if we master that diagram, we basically master the power that music has over people. And you can use that in our own compositions, own improvisations. Last video, we talked about scales and how that diagram fits all the different scales that are out there, all the musical elements, not just scales, but chords, themes, full musical pieces can be represented using that diagram. And we talked about how to approach scales in a different, healthier way. Scales are musical alphabets that you're using to communicate with inhabitants of different musical countries. And we're studying 7 main countries. And last week, we prepared all the different alphabets, which are unique to each of the countries. I think in this video, I'm going to unlock some really important concepts that are going to hopefully stick with you for the rest of your musical life. And I'm also going to try to answer some of the questions that I got from the comments that I got. And thank you so much for those. I really appreciate that. So let's get started by taking a look at what we worked on last video. Last video, we've had our 7 different musical alphabets, which each have 7 different notes. There's 7 musical letter alphabets that correspond to 7 different countries. And we're going to start to compare those. Let's first focus on the major countries. On the left side, we've got 3 major countries: Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. I'm only going to focus on those 3 different musical alphabets, and we're going to compare them. And if we do that, we can see that all these 3 different alphabets have a root, the first column, of course. There's only one option as far as where the root is. Same thing with the octave, the 8th column. Again, the first column and the 8th are the same exact notes, just separated an octave apart, but they have the same function, and there's only one possibility. Then we're going to start comparing the second column. And you can see that on that second column, the Ionian mode, or scale, or language, interchangeable words, Lydian and Mixolydian all have a major second. So that's another common note or common musical letter to these 3 different alphabets. The third column is for the third. That determines where that country is going to go on our big map. Is it a major country or a minor country? Well, it's a major country. We know that because we're looking at the major classification of these countries. So the third is major. It's the third that determines where these countries are going to fit on our big map. So they are major. All of these are major. So far we have 3 notes in common between the Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. In other words, we have 3 letters in common between these 3 different musical alphabets. So if you knew 3 notes, root, or 1, major second, major third, you could start making words, licks, musical ideas, and be understood by the inhabitants of the Ionian country, the Lydian country, and the Mixolydian country. Great. Let's continue. The fourth, we notice that the fourth differs here. In the Lydian country, the fourth is augmented. So that's not a common letter. It's not a common note. The next column, the 5th column, we see that we have perfect fifths for the Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. So we're going to circle that perfect fifth. That's 4 notes in common, 4 letters in common between the Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian alphabet. Let's move on. The 6th, they're all major 6th. Great, that's another note. So we have the major 6th in the Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. And then let's take a look at the seventh column, which can be major or minor. And we see that the Mixolydian has a minor seventh and the other two have a major seventh. So that's not a common note. Great. So we can notice here that 5 notes are common. 5 letters can be used to make words, speak musically, and you'll be understood by 3 inhabitants, by the Ionian inhabitants, Lydian, and Mixolydian. So just with these 5 notes, you can speak in 3 different countries. It's great. You don't need to know all the letters of each alphabet yet. Keyword is yet. That's coming. So that's for the major countries. 5 letters in common between these 3 different alphabets. Let's move on to the other side. We're going to study the minor countries, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Notice that Locrian is on the bottom of that list. The Locrian country is a minor country because it has a minor third, but for now, we're going to leave that country aside because it's a very particular and unique country. We'll discover why in a little bit, but for now, let's leave that aside and just work on the Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian countries. We're going to do the same exact work that we did with the major countries. We're going to find the common notes between these 3 different musical alphabets. And we have the root in common. We know that. We talked about it before, which is just like the octave. First column and 8th column, same thing. The second is not common to all 3 languages, alphabets, because the Phrygian has a minor second. The other 2 have major seconds, so we're going to leave that alone. The third, you should know that by now. What kind of third do we have in the minor countries? We have a minor third. If it was a major third, it would not be on the minor side. Let's move on. The fourth, we see that they all have a perfect fourth. So we're going to circle that fourth. That's another common musical letter to these 3 different musical alphabets. So if we started making a word or lick using a root, a minor third, and a perfect fourth, we could be speaking in 3 different languages. That word is common to all 3 different countries. So that's one lick that would work on all 3 of these different musical countries. Let's continue. The 5th column, if we compare Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian, we have a perfect 5th. So that's another note that is common to all 3 of these particular minor countries. Moving on to the 6th. The 6th is not the same for each of these 3 different alphabets because you notice that in the Dorian country, we have a major 6th. The other 2 have a minor 6th. So we're going to leave that column alone. And the 7th, notice that each of these 3 countries have a minor 7th. So we're going to circle that. The 8th is common, but we're going to leave that 8th. We know that because the 8th and the 1st are the same. So we have 5 notes in common between the Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. So already that should simplify things. Instead of having to learn all the 7 letters of each of these countries, you only have to learn 2 right now. One for the major countries and one for the minor countries. It's a simpler alphabet. It's a 5-letter alphabet instead of a 7-letter alphabet. So if you were to visit the Dorian country, instead of telling yourself that, man, I've got to learn a 7-letter alphabet, which is not that complicated, you don't. You just have to learn a 5-letter alphabet, and with that alphabet, you'll be able to speak in the Dorian country, the Phrygian country, and the Aeolian country. It's almost having a free pass to communicate with a lot of different people, to play on a lot of different musical beds, to play in a lot of different musical contexts already. So those are very important alphabets. On the major side, we have a 5-letter alphabet that's going to work on all of these major countries. On the minor side, we have another 5-letter alphabet that's going to work on these 3 minor countries. I said that the Locrian is a little odd because within the Locrian mode, we can almost fit that 5-letter alphabet that works on the other minor modes, minor countries, Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian, but the 5th does not work because notice on the Locrian, we have a diminished 5th. Penta means 5. Pentatonic, a 5-tone scale. a 5-letter alphabet. See what I'm doing there? In the minor country, there is a minor pentatonic scale. Why minor pentatonic? Because we're in a minor country. On the major side, we have a major pentatonic. A lot of players, not only beginners or intermediate, but professional players you know, rely exclusively on those simpler forms of musical alphabets, the pentatonic alphabets, because they sound great and because they allow you to communicate quite effectively on a lot of different musical beds, explore different countries, and just use a couple scales, a couple alphabets, the major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, depending on the country you're visiting, and you can create music that really speaks to a lot of people. But those simpler forms of alphabets, although very expressive, are not completely expressive. We're basically missing 2 columns. And remember, in video number 1, we said that each of these columns trigger certain emotions. In essence, what I'm saying here is that if you're using a 5-letter alphabet, you're not using the full potential of emotions, colors that you could have. I want you to get there. So instead of seeing these different countries as 7 different letter alphabets that you have to learn each time, just see them as main classifications of countries. Major countries, major pentatonic. Minor countries, minor pentatonic, to which you're adding 2 columns. If you're visiting a major country, the 2 notes you're going to add to your major pentatonic scale are going to be found in the 4th column and the 7th column. If you're visiting a minor country, the 2 notes you're going to add to your minor pentatonic scale are going to be in the 2nd column and the 6th column. So you could see these different modes or scales or musical alphabets as pentatonic scales to which you're adding 2 notes. These 2 notes are called the characteristic notes because those characterize the scale or the alphabet you're using. Those 2 notes really tell the listener that you're either in the Dorian mode country or the Phrygian mode. Those are going to be very important when you're targeting certain colors and visiting certain countries. Those are going to make you sound like a native speaker. Now, I hear some of you saying that all that makes sense. That's great, but how do I apply it on my instrument? It's such a great question. You need to ask yourself that question, and I'm going to answer that in the next video. I actually do have an announcement to make. That's coming very soon. Watch your inboxes. I'm going to tell you about a course that I spent the last 4.5 years developing. It's the most extensive course that I've ever done, and it's really going to make a big difference in your playing if you want to unlock these things. But in the meantime, let me know what you think about all this. I want to hear your comments below. I'll check them out. I'll answer if there's any questions, and keep an eye on your inboxes because tomorrow I've got the announcement of that big course. It's opening tomorrow for a very limited time. I'll see you then. In the meantime, thanks for watching this, and I will see you tomorrow.
Hi, this is Jennifer Banton from the Michael Jackson and Jeff Beck Bands, and I just wanted to give a little shout out about the David Wallimann courses online. He's a monster guitar player, and he actually knows what he's doing to the point where he can really break it down and make all those concepts that seem so difficult really easy to understand. So, my friends, check it out. It's going to work for you.